So it's not something that simply just arises out of a demand that is being made. Is that as this government, we've been committed to this, as well as, of course, since President Zuma's first administration, starting in 2009, education became defined as an apex priority, not just.
Minister, perhaps also to clarify, is it education as a whole or higher education as a sector? Because there have been various terms used in this commission that it is higher education that is the apex priority. The apex priority, in your words, is education as a whole.
Education as a whole, yes, Judge. That's what is an apex priority. Now, just to highlight, I've already spoken about NSFAS and how NSFAS has increased. For instance, if you look at universities under paragraph 2.1, I think it's second bullet point, it increased from well, let me start actually with the third bullet, because this is also very significant, just to remind ourselves of the figures. In 2010, TVET College NSFAS bursaries were 318 million, and by 2016 they've reached 2.3 billion. What is also important about the TVET or NSFAS in TVET is that it's a grant. It doesn't get paid back. And for universities, same period, 2010-2016, from 2.2 billion to 6.4 billion right now. And a total of 14.6 billion will be dispersed by NSFAS this year to support approximately 480,000. We've got also substantial additional funding dispersed by NSFAS from the National Skills Fund for scarce skills bursaries, as well as SETAs for bursaries to support skills in specific sectors. Department of Basic Education for teacher bursaries and Department of Social Development for social work, amongst others. What we also do not mention here, Judge, is that government funding for fee-free higher education is not only limited to this, which is a matter now that we will need to consolidate. For example, there are 3,000 doctors who are training in Cuba who are paid for by government, 100%. Medical students in South Africa, we do not mention them here, they get paid for by government, those who come from poor backgrounds, fully. There are also many other bursaries. That's what we will need to pull together. We don't have those combined figures. We will need a system to do that. At national level, by various government departments, provincial level, as well as local government level. Now, we also this year subsidize the 2.3 billion rand shortfall as a result of no fee increase. Government paid 1.9 billion. Current work, as I have said, focusing on the missing middle. By the way, I need to correct this, because the focus on the missing middle is not something that arises out of the fees must fall campaign. Government, we had already identified this a few years back and actually started doing some work, because we were seeing this as a problem as a result partly also of a NSFAS cap that has not been changing or that has not changed for a very long time. So the fact that we have grown NSFAS like this, it shows government's commitment to this. Similarly in TVET colleges as well. Maybe I can pause there, Judge, in terms of our response. But maybe before I pause, sorry, let me just say this, just to underline the point that I've made. It is not money alone that will be the solution to these problems that we are facing, but it's also to create conditions for this money to make maximum impact, to focus on improving the pass rates and the throughput rates, as well as ensuring that these monies are also handled properly without any form of corruption, which is a challenge in the system. Let me pause there, Judge.
Minister, may I ask, before we go on to the measures introduced by government in response to the demand, a central premise of the students' demand, as we've heard through presentations made before us, is for what is termed decommodification of education. Now, has government come to terms with what is meant by decommodification, and what's your response to the demand that higher education should be decommodified?
Government agrees with the idea that education should be decommodified. The issue is, what is the content, the meaning of that decommodification? And what does it translate into? Decommodification simply means education must not be sold and bought like a jersey, so that only those who can afford money for the jersey will be able to get the jersey. It should be accessible to all those who require it. In our instance, we have defined that as the poor in the first instance, as well as those categories who may not be falling within the poor, but who cannot be able to afford. That's why we have these policies, precisely because we want access to education not to be based on who has money or who doesn't have money. But that some take this too far to say education must therefore be free for everyone. That's not government policy. And I think that it's not going to be government policy for a long time to come. We have a highly unequal society. Those who can afford to pay must pay, and those who are rich and wealthy must also pay. It's inappropriate for a society like ours to define decommodification in that manner. It must be the poor and those who cannot afford who must actually be assisted.
Do you understand the students' demands as being demands that there should be free education for everybody?
Some of them, not all of them, Judge. Some of them actually are putting this slogan, and some academics saying that it must be free for everyone. They want free quality higher education now.
So the demand for decommodification, Minister, has thus far been made by a number of student formations before us. It's been made by SAUS, by BLF, by SASCO, by YCL. And the basis for the demand for decommodification of higher education is the public good that's derived from higher education. And in their view, that the public good is so overwhelming that your university should be free for all, and that there shouldn't be any price tag attached to higher education. And so, in other words, no tuition fees at all, and that government must just pay for all of your university education. And what's your response to that?
Judge, from my engagement with the students, not all are calling for that. There are others who understand that it's not for all. It's not free higher education for all. As I have said, some are demanding that, but not all of them. Some of the students grouping understand it. As I say, we have no problem with decommodification. In fact, in our instance, in our case, let me put it that way, as South Africa now, what we are doing is part of decommodification of education. By saying to those who cannot pay, it must not be like a commodity they can't afford. But to pay for the rich would not be decommodification, actually. You will be asking the poor to subsidize the rich. If you ask everybody, including the rich, to be paid for by government, you would actually be commodifying education because the poor will subsidize the rich.
Minister, it does seem that what you mean by decommodification depends somewhat on your political philosophy, because certain of the students suggested that private education, private higher institutions were ipso facto commodification of education, and that the providers of private education should be thrown in jail.
In my young days, I used to say so too, Judge. Not that my ideological orientation has changed, but we should take into account context. Let me put it like this. Some have been saying and arguing, Cuba, higher education is free for everyone. Of course it should be, because there is no wealthy class in Cuba. So there's a different situation altogether. You can't, in highly unequal capitalist societies, have free higher education for all. Even where you have had that in some few countries, the situation has been very different. For instance, if you take some of the Scandinavian countries, the taxes are high. You have got almost near full employment of society with very high taxes. And also the standards are high. You can't get to university unless you have got 70, 75%, and they are actually sure that you are going to pass. But even in some countries, it's not free in the sense that Germany, for instance, they've done away with tuition fees, but it's only a tuition-free system. Food, accommodation, transport, you pay for yourself. You know, Judge, maybe just to illustrate what I'm saying, our Consul General in Munich, when I heard that higher education is now free in Germany, not only for Germans, for every student, even from outside Germany, I said, this is my opportunity I've been looking for, because I want spaces for masters and PhDs as part of our training of new academics. Well, she just became cold, you know. Said, well, I'm not so sure whether we'll benefit out of this because it's only tuition. And possibly the place to stay will cost 3 times more. And the food and the transport, even if it's public transport. So it may not be cheap after all for South Africans to go to Germany, even if they can benefit from tuition fee. So that would be our argument and government's position as to decommodification in our context. What does it mean?
Minister, you're correct that certain students, while they do make out a case for decommodification, have tempered the demand so that at the moment they ask for, they ask for fee-free higher education and training for the poor and the missing middle. But they do definitely maintain that at some point we should realize fee-free higher education and training for all. So in other words, they accept that at the moment it might not be appropriate because of our economic circumstances. But government has to work towards realizing fee-free higher education and training for all at some point. What's your response to that?
Yeah. No, Judge. It depends on what we are talking about. Maybe at some point, yes.
As the percentage of poor becomes very small in the whole population.
Possibly, or if you have a socialist South Africa, Judge.
Yeah.
That would add to what also would necessitate and also under what conditions, you know, I'm just saying. But on this trajectory we are on as a country, it's difficult to see that in the immediate future. Maybe in future, yes, we will reach that. That's fine. Yeah.
But Minister, your point remains. It's not government policy now.
Yes.
And it won't be government policy for a long time. Well, perhaps in our foreseeable future.
If South Africa remains the kind of society with this economic system that it has, I don't see that happening under that context.
Well, Minister, we've looked quite closely at the chapter on education in the NDP, chapter 9. And it's very clear that littered throughout the entire chapter is emphasis on the public good to be derived from higher education. And in fact, we had testifying before us, the Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission, Professor Makgoba. And his testimony was that the NDP does approach the question of higher education as a public good. Do you agree with that interpretation?
I entirely agree, Judge, that education should be seen as a common public good, which is why the poor must be assisted to access it, because it's a public good. But also we must create institutions that are available to all, like we are doing now. We are subsidizing the university system. We are subsidizing the college system for everybody. They benefit from that subsidy in terms of, as Advocate Pillay was saying, the block grants and to a large extent the earmark grant that we actually do. In our context, to make education a common public good, we must invest in it, build a good quality system. Like our system is very reputable, not only in the African continent, the university system, but globally. That is why government is investing, because it is a common public good.
Now, Professor Makgoba's view, Minister, was that, in fact, the NDP envisages free higher education and training for all. And he states that government can afford free higher education and training for all, and it's just a question of prioritization that's preventing the rolling out of free higher education and training for all. So in other words, his testimony was that there's a misalignment between what the NDP requires and what the budget ultimately provides.
Maybe I'm in a little bit of a disadvantage because I have not seen the actual formulation by Professor Makgoba. But that is not how I understand the NDP to be saying that. It says it's free higher education for all. By the way, even now, this free higher education for the poor is up until the attainment of an undergraduate qualification. It's not for the rest of your honors, your masters, your PhDs. Those get funded through scholarships based almost exclusively on merit. That you're doing well, you can be able to access. Is at least until you acquire, not until. Free higher education for the poor until undergraduate qualification.
Yeah, just on that, Minister, Dr. Parker, we engaged her on that similar thing, that what if a formative maybe qualification does not allow you to enter the workplace immediately. We made an example maybe of a BA law, and then you still need an LLB so that you can do articles, so that you are employable. So, and we were saying, how does free help then? Because we've got to graduate with a degree that is not vocational in nature, on its own. And then she said, on those circumstances, the TEFs are caps, in that it funds the senior degree. I'm not sure if that is how it was kept.
Just to clarify, for instance, you have your BCom, and if you want to be a chartered accountant, you must do that honors. So she was explaining to us in those circumstances that there might there would be funding available for that. And for an engineering, if you needed the extra diploma or certificate, that would be funded too.
Yes, she was correct. I was just articulating the principle that it's free till undergraduate qualification. Then what kicks in there is the scarce skills intervention, the fund of scarce skills that goes to NSFAS, which then says we will support in instances where it requires. For instance, let me make another example, Judge, which is a problem area that we have at the moment, is that in universities of technology, the basic qualification is a diploma, which often is a 3-year diploma, say a 3-year diploma in civil engineering. You graduate. Strictly speaking, NSFAS doesn't then fund your BTech, which is your next 1-year program, because then we will be going outside the bounds of the policy. But if it's in scarce skills area, and that BTech is going to enable you to then be able to go into the field so that you can register as a professional engineer, then we provide assistance there. I suppose that's the issue of priorities again. You know, that we say in this instance, because these are skills we need, we will actually do extra support in order to be able to produce the kinds of skills that we need.
Does the Act in its current format articulate that, or it's an alignment that needs to be made?
What, the NSFAS Act? I'm not so sure. We will need to check that, what it says. But we regard this as a policy intervention guided by a whole range of government policies in terms of what our priorities are. May not be in the Act like that, but it's our policy interventions which we think are necessary in order to address skills shortages.
Minister, if I may ask you to have a look at Annexure A to this letter.
Ms. Pillay, can you just help us? In our pack, we don't have an Annexure
in the
A.
pack that we submitted to you, Judge. Is that right, Advocate?
It's not marked. If Ms. Pillay can just help us.
It appears in a block, so it looks like a table in the table format.
Is it the report?
Is that the one which has got report, recommendation?
That's
Yeah,
correct.
I've got it.
Now, you said what is set out in this table, Minister, is the recommendations made in the report of the Ministerial Committee and the review of the NSFAS scheme, and the recommendations made and the status of implementation of the recommendations. The one I just wanted to ask certain questions around is B in the first block. We know that one of the recommendations of this Ministerial Committee was that a higher education student financial aid model that progressively provides free higher education to undergrad level for students from the poor and working class communities. And one of the steps taken to implement that was, as set out in B, a ministerial task team chaired by Mr. Sizwe Nkosana has been established in April 2016 to develop a comprehensive funding and student support model for poor and missing middle students. Do you see that, Minister?
Yes, I can see that.
Now, what's clear from what's reflected here is that the task team that's been established under the chairpersonship of Mr. Nkosana is meant to look at a model, or is meant to come up with a student support model for the poor and missing middle students. Now, what I wanted to ascertain, does this mean that a policy decision has been made within the department and within government that students from the missing middle will from now on be funded? And what's left to determine at this stage it's just a question of modality?
We have, as government, identified, Judge, that the issue of the missing middle, which, by the way, we started a while back. That is why I also need to say that there will have to be a way of this work finding itself into the Commission. Because you can't really separate these things, but...
We agree, Minister, and we will be looking very closely at the report once we receive it. We've been trying very hard to get it, but because it was due to be placed before you, I think people were reluctant to give it to us first.
Yes.
I'm just trying to ascertain, Minister, whether there has been a policy decision that students from the missing middle will be funded through NSFAS going forward.
We have identified that as a gap, and there is an in-principle commitment that we need to find a way of assisting missing middle students. As to what form that will take, we're not yet there. Although a lot of work has been done by the ministerial task team, and maybe also, of course, as the Commission, we've got the power to subpoena, but we were of the view that because of the political sensitivities, maybe when that report comes, we need to first processes, which doesn't prevent the Commission from making its comments or any type of comment on it, so that we are able to manage that at least, because also from a political point of view, it's got monetary implications. So in terms of our own procedures, for instance, you'll have to have it via Cabinet, even if Cabinet doesn't take a decision, but just to be aware of what that means. So as to where that money comes from to help the missing middle is something that also has yet to be established. But certainly, yes, we think that as government, we need to find ways and means of supporting the missing middle.
So this policy decision that's been made, Minister, that we will now come to the assistance of the missing middle and the money will follow. So money will be found to implement at least the pilot in 2017.
Maybe let me put it this way, that the two things have to come together, because we have identified that the missing middle requires support. But you may find that because of the complexity, I'm making an example, of supporting the missing middle, therefore it doesn't become possible, then we will have to relook into that. But we have identified and have said we appreciate that there is a real need there.
We know that the model will be piloted in 2017. We've had evidence before this Commission that the pilot will be implemented in 2017. I just want to understand, Minister, what factors will be considered as to whether or not to extend the pilot beyond 2017?
Well, firstly, I need to make this clear that we have not as yet, the highest authority, which is Cabinet, has not yet given the green light. It's a suggestion that a pilot needs to be undertaken for 2017. But even if the go-ahead gets given, it does not therefore mean that after the pilot, it certainly means it will be implemented. That's why it's called a pilot. Because after that pilot, you might actually say, no, this thing is actually not working. Either we throw it out or we find completely different ways of dealing with it. And in dealing with that, as I say, we said, let's not stop this groundwork. But that thing will also not be actually finally be concluded outside of the Commission's work, Judge.
And just in terms of the pilot, I'm just trying to get a sense of how it will work, Minister. If you have a student who is from the missing middle and who enters the system in 2017 on the strength that she will qualify for NSFAS funding, on the basis of the implementation of the pilot. What happens to that student in 2017 if the decision is not to continue with the model beyond 2017?
I get your point. The proposal, which, as I say, have also not been officially accepted, is that if a pilot were to be done, it would only be done in 7 institutions, if I'm not mistaken. That is the proposal. But you are right. Maybe it's something that we hadn't thought about, which you are raising, as to if we pilot, you are in a way creating an expectation already. So then that will have to be taken into account as to, in looking at the report, it certainly is something that will have to be looked into.
And just the final point on the pilot, Minister, is that you know that in terms of 29(1)B, you have to put in place measures to progressively realize the right. So once you pilot the model for 2017, if you remove the model after that, isn't that a retrogressive measure?
If you remove support, not necessarily the model.
Well,
because you may pilot
the support by virtue of the model, yes, the support to missing middle.
We will have to look into that. Because, as I say, it's a legitimate point that we are actually raising. As part of responding to or as part of engaging with the proposal as a whole. That is why, therefore, it's very important that sooner rather than later, that model will have to come here, because the Commission will have to reflect on that. Otherwise, we run the risk of indirectly taking away the role, some of the powers of the role of the Commission, or we run parallel processes that would not actually be ideal. But as I said, insofar as doing the investigation, we said we mustn't stop it just because there is a commission, because that work, if then it's going to come in here, at least there's some groundwork that has been done.
We appreciate that, Minister, and we have certainly been looking forward to seeing the report. We've been told that the buck stops with you, Minister, so maybe you can tell us when we can expect the report.
Maybe if, through you, Judge, I can request perhaps that our counsel here could maybe engage with yourself as evidence leader at some stage to actually discuss this matter, because it's not that the buck stops with me in not wanting the report to come here. It's the period we are in, and that if such a thing, because once it comes here, it's public. When we haven't looked at it, the political structures, we are not saying that the Commission is subject to those political structures. I don't want to be misunderstood. Judicial Commission has got powers over everybody. But also it's important that, so that even when you call us afterwards and say, what are you saying about this report, we would have had a chance to at least look at it through the necessary political structures. I don't know, Judge, maybe with your permission, because we did discuss this matter with the...
If I might just come on record very briefly, Judge.
Yes, I don't know whether there's any point in swearing you in, since you're simply going to add a helpful comment.
Yes, I don't propose to give any evidence. Just that there is a clear legal as well as political sensitivity about furnishing a document which is drafted for submission to Cabinet, which Cabinet hasn't yet had an opportunity to see or to take a view on. And therefore we would hope that without getting into legalities, we can find some modality that would be acceptable to all interested parties. If not, we'll have to face that problem if we get there, but we don't anticipate we should be in that situation.
Well, you can't give us any time frame.
Well, I personally can't. I don't know whether the Minister can.
When would you hope that it would be placed before the Cabinet, Minister?
Judge, the report now is supposed to be with my office, with the department. That's what we had agreed.
He's finalizing it.
He's still finalizing it. Now, what time is it now? What day is it?
We're looking in the context of the Commission's, as you know, timetable.
Yeah. Okay. I think can we come back to you, Judge, on that?
Yes, I can't see that we can bind you to anything here.
Yes.
And I don't think it would be right to do so anyway.
Yes. We'll come back to you as soon as possible.
I would ask you to bear in mind that it is important in the work that we're doing.
Yes.
And to find that the government is running in one direction and we in the other, with little possibility of our meeting.
Judge, I agree entirely with you. That's what I've been emphasizing, that this commission will have to have sight and be briefed and be able also to ask questions about that, because it would be a proposal. Yes. It's just that our concern is that it should just take certain stages. And also we want to bear in mind that we don't want to delay the work of the Commission.
I fully understand that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. If we can move briefly to the question of prioritization, Minister. Now, we know that in the past year or two, since the Fees Must Fall movement began in 2015, there have been a number of significant decisions taken in response to the protest action. These include the 0% fee increment decision, the decision, what we call the Circular 6 decision around student debt, the wiping out of student debt for the past 3 years. And it includes the more recent decision that government will subsidize or will cover the fee increment in relation to poor and missing middle students for 2017. And of course, then also the pilot, which we've just been discussing now for 2017. All of these appear to be concrete measures introduced by government in direct response to the protest action. The question, however, Minister, is why these measures were not introduced before the protest action commenced. In other words, was it a question of lack of political will, or what was the reason that these interventions only became apparent once the protest action had taken center stage?
Judge, I assume that Advocate Pillay now is covering issues that are just about in the rest of the document. Am I right?
I'm sorry, I may have jumped under the rubric of response. No, I'm happy, Minister, if you want to first deal with the narrative and then we can go on to the questions.
No, I don't have a problem, actually, because it may be a better way, in view of time, that, maybe we just begin to go into those issues. And where I feel maybe that I just need to say something a little bit more that is here, I will say it in the context of my answers. I would like to say, Judge, that at no stage did we stop the process of progressive introduction of free higher education for the poor as government. What the students they were complaining about perhaps is something that we can relate to the pace at which things were happening in government, but we never stopped. For example, if you look at NSFAS, the increases in NSFAS and other interventions that were made were actually informed by the necessity to continue to progressively introduce free higher education for the poor. And then, of course, of late also talking about the issue of the missing middle. Let me give concrete examples of that. The first one is the fact that NSFAS more than tripled between 2010 and 2015. That was the fastest growing item on the entire budget of government, which then shows the extent to which we were doing this. Secondly, we also made, it's in one of the documents here now, you see, I'm not as elegant as lawyers. Lawyers, they always impress me, Judge, in court, you know. If you go to document so and so, it's all nicely numbered and so on. I'm not yet. But there is a document here which talks about interventions that we made to NSFAS, which points to, amongst other things, interventions we made to improve and to make it easier for students to access the poor students. For example, when our department was established in 2009, students were charged interest on NSFAS the first day they get the loan. In other words, here is Nzimande coming to do LLB first year. So I get given a NSFAS loan. I start on the 23rd of February at university. Interest starts accumulating then. I get for the second year LLB2 more and more interest, you know. By the time you leave, you finish your degree, you not only owe the original capital, but it's also huge interest. So what we did, we said, no, this is very unfair. It makes life very difficult. So we are not going to charge interest until a year after graduation, which were some of the measures that we were actually taking to introduce. I've already spoken about the final year, that if you finish all your courses for final year, that gets converted into a bursary. We then also the National Skills Fund, which this year has released 1.3 billion for scarce skills. By the way, those scarce skills bursaries are full grants. They are not to be paid back. So all these were measures that we were implementing, including, of course, expansion into TVET colleges. I would like to say, Judge, without fear of contradiction, there is free higher education in South Africa. The problem is that it has not reached everybody who is supposed to be benefiting from it.
Well, there's also a contradiction in this, because the more you convert NSFAS loans into bursaries, the less self-sustaining you make the project. And one of the basic foundations of the NSFAS scheme was the intention that it should strive towards self-sustainability.
Yes and no, Judge. Because right from the word go, the model of NSFAS was that it will be a mix. It will have a loan component, possibly larger, but it will also have a bursary or grant component.
Yes, but in 2014, the recovery rate of NSFAS loans was 4%.
Yes, Judge,
but this suggests that self-sustainability has been thrown out of the window.
That's a slightly different problem.
Well, it's a combined problem, I would have thought.
Yes.
Anyway.
It's a slightly different problem because that one relates to capacity rather than abandoning recovery. That NSFAS has really been battling with capacity to recover, which now we are significantly improving through working in the main with the South African Revenue Service. And through other methods, we've actually identified now many people who are not paying back, who actually must be paying. Even government employees, I'm sure even in my own department, there are NSFAS beneficiaries who are not paying, but we're going to be identifying them now that they should actually pay. We always knew, Judge, we always knew that we will not, there will be money into NSFAS that will not come back because it will be translated into a grant. Which means that the fiscus will always have to provide new money all the time. But then we would hope that a significant, sizable section will be paid back by those who are working. Well, whether that model is still sustainable or not, I suppose the Commission will have to also assist us in terms of examining it quite critically, and what needs to be done.
Minister, just to return, I believe the document you're trying to refer to on the top says old NSFAS and improved NSFAS.
Yes.
In an answer to Ms. Pillay with regards to that it wasn't only now in response to the students, you wanted to refer to that document. Is that correct?
Say that again, Advocate.
In response to Ms. Pillay's question to you about government only now increasing or government only now announcing these decisions in response to the fees must fall. The start of your argument was it's not only now.
Yes.
And then you said there's a document. Is that the document you wanted to refer to?
Yes. But it doesn't constitute the totality of my answer. Because I was raising for now, referring to this document, just to illustrate the point that we have been doing certain things to improve NSFAS as part of implementing fee-free higher education for the poor. Then the point I was going to be making is that what the student protests in essence are saying is that your pace is not enough. You need to move faster. Which is why then, in moving faster, well, that response was really to deal with an immediate situation to say there shall be no fee increase. It was an interim thing. That is why it was accompanied at the same time by the announcement of the establishment of this commission. Because that is this commission that must now help us to move faster, but also come up with a plan of how is this going to be done. 2017 also is a stopgap measure. It's an interim measure to say whilst we are tying up, the commission is doing its work, let's find some measures of relief, given now what the students are saying. It is true, we must admit, we were implementing it, but the students are saying not fast enough.
Minister, you testified that education has been, for a number of years now, has been an apex priority for government. That's correct? And do we assume from that higher education and training is also has always been an apex priority, government's apex priority?
From 2009, in terms of government's medium-term strategic framework, it said there are 5 priorities, and then the apex priority being education, including higher education, but within the context of the Constitution. Not in the same way, for instance, between basic and higher education or further education as it is captured in the Constitution.
Can I just understand what that means, Minister? Does that mean that how you've articulated the constraints on the rights in the Constitution, that's transferred into how government approaches education as an apex priority?
Say that again, sorry.
You mentioned that it's an apex priority, that education is an apex priority through the Constitution. I'm just trying to understand what that means.
No, not through the Constitution. Government's policy as captured in the medium-term strategic framework from 2009 identified education as an apex priority. 5 priorities in the main, which translates into particular outcomes. No, but you were asking me if then I'm talking about education as an apex priority, do I mean both basic and higher? That is why I said yes, but within the context of the Constitution, that the two things are not exactly the same, much as they are an apex priority.
But can I just ask you to explain what that means in real terms, in practical terms?
What it means when I say within the Constitution, it's exactly it's the difference between 29(1)A and 29(1)B. That 29(1)A talks about basic education as a fundamental right, but it does 29(1)B doesn't say so in relation to further education.
Does this mean that while both basic education and further education and higher education are both apex priorities, that basic education is of a higher priority than a higher education?
The way it is defined in the Constitution, as you said earlier, when you were talking about basic and adult education, that it's a must, that they must be given money. Unlike 29(1)B. The fact that we were talking about both, it meant also in relation to 29(1)B, we actually intended to accelerate the realization of 29(1)B, which amongst other things is illustrated by the increase in NSFAS and the expansion of NSFAS into TVET colleges.
We had before us, Minister, Mr. Michael Sachs, who was a DDG in National Treasury, and he testified before us that at the Cabinet Lekgotla in July of this year, a decision was taken that higher education is an apex priority. And within that context, that it might indicate that higher education is treated differently in the budgeting from now onwards.
Judge, I'm glad if Treasury came here to say that, because they are precisely the ones who must then give content to that. If he said that, yes, of course, we hope that the medium-term budget policy statement to be announced by the Minister of Finance is possibly going to signal that, hopefully. Of course, I can't say that. I'm not the Minister of Finance, but I'm happy if Treasury came to say that, because, of course, they are the ones authorized to actually come out and say, okay, it is an apex priority and it's going to be showing in the budget that now more resources are going to be going into post-school, hopefully.
In fairness to Mr. Sachs, I should indicate he didn't say it will be reflected in the budget. He said it may be reflected in the budget.
That's better, Judge. It's better than nothing.
Minister, well, perhaps let's get the facts right first.
Yeah.
If it was said in the Cabinet Lekgotla, number one, you would have been present.
Yes.
Your recall of the Lekgotla, was it understood in that manner as articulated by Ms. Pillay?
Judge, I have a bit of a difficulty now with this question. The reason being that, not that I don't want to answer, but cabinet discussions are secret, and also cabinet decisions are announced through particular authorized channels. That is why I'm saying that if he said that, coming from Treasury, having the authority to talk about translation of priorities into rands and cents, hopefully, I would rather leave it at that to Treasury to be able to do that. And I'm saying, I'm hoping that something will come out clearly out of the medium-term budget statement. Because even if I was present, I can't make that mistake of speaking when cabinet, unless, of course, the laws then of the country or other processes trump that. I'm in a bit of a difficulty there.
Well,
Judge.
we're not going to get into that sort of debate now.
Okay.
You may assume that for the moment what is said in cabinet is confidential.
Yeah.
May I just ask you, Minister, you testified that the department has made numerous bids to National Treasury for further funding, for additional funding, and that not many of these are successful. Perhaps you can enlighten us as to where it is that the problems are being encountered, at what level, just so that we could understand where to conduct our inquiries.
Firstly, the bigger question that perhaps faces not just government, although immediately it's a government issue, is government budget reflective of our priorities in the manner that it should be? Frankly, I think that would be an issue that I would even like the Commission with appropriate people to interrogate that.
We are in the process of interrogating that issue, Minister.
Yes, I would be very pleased. Because often the problem arises from there, one source of the problem. But it's not a malicious thing if a budget doesn't, to the detail, reflect the priorities of government as they are, because of the many balancing act that has got to be done and the many priorities that are there. That's the first issue. The second issue, though, is the state of the economy and the revenue, therefore, that government is able to get as a result of the poor state of the economy. As a matter of fact, one of the difficulties, if you ask me, as a minister in cabinet, first appointed in 2009 and again in 2014, is that I've been a government minister responsible for a department that requires huge sums of money at a time, right at the time in 2008, there was a global economic meltdown. That has been my frustration, Judge. Because had we maybe in another situation, maybe we would actually be talking differently. As I say, I'm not the Minister of Finance. I'm just telling you that this government has been in the shadow of the fact that we've been in a global economic crisis that we are not out of at the moment. We were partly cushioned by selling our minerals to China, which was gobbling iron ore and everything. China has stopped now. We were also cushioned by infrastructure, investment into infrastructure. The administration between 2009 to 2014 investing a record trillion rands, which also cushioned us. Otherwise, it's been very difficult economically being in these two administrations, the past one as well as this one, which also is another source.
Now, why this question of prioritization becomes so crucial, Minister, is that we see immediately after the protest action in 2015, and you'll see it reflected in this letter, which is the communique on the decisions reached in January. And you'll see the middle paragraph says, the President in his January 8th statement to the nation announced that government has listened to the concerns raised by the student and has made the following key decisions on the short-term funding challenges for the agreement of University South Africa. And then listed, you'll see a number of decisions relating to, for example, paying off historic student debt, etc. But what's clear from this excerpt, and this is really what we're driving at, Minister, is that a policy decision is made, and all of a sudden substantial amounts of money is released to follow that decision. Now, what we're trying to understand is how that happens. So in other words, are there pots of money floating around that can be accessed if and when the political decision is made?
Judge, there are no pots of money
I'm very disappointed.
that are lying out there to grab from. Because of the pressure, there was reprioritization. Let me tell you one prioritization that is very painful to me, Judge. Reprioritization. I had set aside R1 billion, my department, from the surpluses from the SETAs to send young black South Africans to many universities overseas because we don't have enough supervisory capacity for masters and PhDs, to be trained, educated, and to come back and be allocated to our universities for the period that we sent them overseas. That money is gone. It went to the no-fee increase. Now, the danger of that is that it then postpones, possibly by 3 years, our intervention to halt this process of the aging academics and unable to renew. Something that is important, that it's not just access, but it's also being able to have a quality university system. So always when this happens, unless you raise taxes, you will have to reprioritize from the existing budget. So it's reprioritization. But what we must be clear about is that it's a reprioritization that makes good in one area but is costly for other areas. Let me also say something else, by the way, which I need to say. We had set aside, DG, through you, Judge, 2 billion rands over a 5-year period from this year, 2016 to 2020. 2 billion rands for 8 universities, which are former black universities here in South Africa. For them to be able to use that money to improve their programs and the quality of their offerings as they see fit. For example, University of Zululand was wanting to use that money to create conditions to be able to offer for the very first time in its history engineering programs at its Richards Bay campus. Engineering programs that we need desperately in the country. That money, large parts of it is gone, had to go to subsidize or to pay for a no-fee increase. That's why I think that we need to be absolutely clear that reprioritization means just that. And also, what unfortunately has happened, it has damaged programs that are necessary for the very same university system.
Minister, I want... it's been said that if maybe efficiencies can be improved in the system, in the South African system, we can limit maybe the wasteful expenditure, the corruption, and then we can maybe recover some funds from that. Is that not an option?
True. At one level, that if we fight corruption, excuse me, and we are able to not have monies being lost by being stolen, we indeed are going to be able to do much more. But we need also to nuance that argument. You can't say 3 billion rands, for I'm making an example, lost in the health department is going to fund higher education. It will have to fund programs in the health section. So we also need to nuance it that way. Money lost...
If it's correctly allocated, without the waste and the corruption, it would be on the common fiscus. Would it not be in the National Revenue Fund? It means it can be redistributed from there. You don't have even reached where it's not supposed to be.
Sure, I'm not disagreeing with that. All what I'm saying is perhaps putting differently the same point that I've made, that still it will have to take into account the many other pressing priorities of government, though it would improve the availability of money. That's what I'm saying. It wouldn't necessarily be automatic, but it would improve, but it will still have to be allocated in terms of the various needs of government. But there's no doubt that fighting corruption will really make a big difference if we are able not to lose the amounts of monies that are estimated that we are losing by Treasury.
Minister, if I may briefly move on to PSET targets. And we know that the white paper sets out very aggressive targets for the expansion of the PSET system, and specifically enhanced enrollment targets. Now, you've already testified about the negative consequences of increased enrollments. And in the context of student funding, Minister, that means we know that increased enrollments mean, for example, that NSFAS allocations become inadequate, that universities are forced to top-slice. Certain universities, the ones who can't cross-subsidize, are forced to top-slice, etc., that you will inevitably then have high levels of student debt. We also know that increased enrollments have an impact on block grant funding, because it means less funding per capita student. Now, within that context, is it still government's policy that those enhanced targets should inform planning, or will the targets be revised in order to make them more realistic?
Well, Judge, I think it's a bit of a difficult question to answer, because it also involves projections of revenue. It also involves issues of capacity and all that. It's not impossible for government to revise targets, either downwards or upwards, depending on what the situation is. We hope not that they get revised downwards, because these targets set in the white paper and in the NDP have been very carefully worked out if we are to respond to the economic needs of our country, as well as also absorb our young people. Including, for instance, this target, which I'm sorry to be going back to it, it's because I'm very passionate about it, that we want to improve qualifications, academics qualifications in universities to 75% with PhDs by 2030. It's a very important target. At the moment, we're at what? 43? 43% PhDs. It's very low. In fact, the average looks a bit more respectable, Judge, if you go institution by institution. Some institutions, I've just learned recently of a lecturer who has been teaching for more than 10 years with an honors degree. Something that has got very negative effects on what we are trying to do. So if I understood your question correctly, Dr. Pillay, I hope that we do not revise these targets downwards.
I think you've just promoted me.
Oh, what did I say, Doctor?
Yes, it's just mispronounced.
Yes, you should do a PhD also, Judge. Maybe that should be one of the decisions of this commission. And we will fund it, yes.
Minister, the consequence of your answer would probably be that if you look at the NDP and the white paper and their targets, is it that they were made at a time when certain projections were made, optimistic projections were made, and at a time when economically we were moving at a pace that was good enough to fund various projects. And therefore, it is important, and therefore, when you look at it now, you cannot take the same targets and say, well, Nomaganjan, we will implement it, because we don't have the resources. But is it not for government to educate everybody that the NDP is not necessarily cast in stone? They are there to guide us, and we must, how could we put it? We must endeavor to reach those particular targets.
Yeah. Maybe let me just share with the Commission something. I don't know whether it's somewhere in our documentation that has been submitted before. There are 3 crucial processes that government is engaged in at the moment. The first one, in fact the first 2, are done by National Treasury. They are costing the NDP in relation to higher education and the white paper. Now, the costing, they are doing it in this way. They are saying, if we can maintain what we are providing now and the existing plans, how much is that? But if we are to increase what we have in terms of what the white paper says and the NDP, how much is that? And the 2 things are very different. But those are the 2 processes that are being done by the National Treasury working with us, so that we can answer that question even more authoritatively as to what would that require. The third process we are doing, we are finalizing our own National Post-School Education and Training Plan. These Treasury processes also are helping us greatly in actually finalizing our plan, because we want to go to detail, ideally even when it comes to TVET colleges and community colleges, to say what should happen in each district, municipality, over how long, and how much would that, what would that require? Precisely because we want not to create false expectations, and also to be able to say, well, as you say, Advocate Ali, maybe we planned during good times. It wasn't great of times, but maybe we were optimistic the economy will grow by 3-4%. That is actually not happening. Certainly, we do need to educate our population about these realities and what they mean, including our students. You know, to say that sometimes we must distinguish between a wish and what is realistic. It's very important to actually do that. But that's the work that we are doing. I don't know when we're going to finish it through you, Judge DG. We're going to finish that work, because ideally it would have been good to share some of it with the Commission, you know, so that also for background maybe even, you know. Yeah, that's yeah. We are hoping. Well, our plan will be finished by March. The department's post-school education and training plan. I'm not sure about the Treasury one exercise. By March as well.
They haven't pronounced it.
Okay, they haven't pronounced it. But I just thought that for what it's worth, let me share that.
Thank you. That's very useful. Thank you, Minister. We'll follow up with the DG, of course. Just the second last issue I wanted to raise with you, Minister. Maybe you can just share with us your understanding of the notion of institutional autonomy, public accountability, and academic freedom.
Yeah. No, thanks. When we adopted White Paper 3 that I referred to earlier on higher education in 1997, I remember that very well because I was chairperson of the portfolio committee at the time on education. We said, well, firstly, our constitution, let me put it that way. The constitution in 1996 protected academic freedom, not institutional autonomy, by the way. Protected academic freedom. And then we said as a country, if we are to really, in the South African context, given where we were at the time and given our history, if we are to achieve true academic freedom, we need institutional autonomy. But institutional autonomy on its own is a necessary but not sufficient condition to realize academic freedom. Especially given our history, we need to balance it with public accountability. These are public institutions. They must account on what they do and not just say they will do what they like because they are autonomous. The reason for that, the reasons for that were many. I'm just going to mention, well, I have mentioned some that it's because of our own history. But the reality also is that we were afraid that given our own history, certain institutions will use their autonomy not to pursue academic freedom, but to suppress academic freedom. It's been proven the world over, by the way, that institutional autonomy can be used to suppress academic freedom. In our case also, we were scared that institutional autonomy was going to be used to pursue or to block transformation. To say we are autonomous, you're not going to tell us as government what to do, it's going to be business as usual in our institutions. So that is why we then balance that with public accountability. The mechanisms that we set at that time have been continuously under review. Just like now, this year, was it this year we passed this legislation, the amendment to the Higher Education Act this year, to actually further clarify these matters. Part of the clarification now was to say, by the way, actually, if you balance the two things, the minister is given now in law the powers to set transformation goals. That doesn't mean you interfere with institutional autonomy, but transformation goals can also be set by the minister. So to us, the two things always go together, which is our own innovative way of trying to deal with both our past and the way that we want to move forward. But also my own view now, this is not government's view, possibly it is. My own view is that you also cannot have full academic freedom in the context of untransformed curricula. Because it's freedom to learn things that do not take us forward. That is now the issue, by the way, that is raised by the students quite sharply. That's why I wish they could go back to class and we could have negotiations and have debates and discussions about what we mean about curriculum transformation, especially also given where we come from. They are beginning to raise these things. They are talking about decolonization. All those are things that have a bearing on all these three issues you're talking about: public accountability, institutional autonomy, and academic freedom. Frankly, that's the kind of debate I would also like to see being elevated in our country, in our institutions, as part of shaping this kind of South Africa we want to have.
Now that you mentioned the word, Minister, maybe you can help us understand, just from your own perspective, what does decolonization mean and what would it require?
Or would you need another week, Minister?
No, Advocate. In fact, the way I would answer that, that's why we need a debate, because I'm not sure whether we are talking, or even the students, they read from the same, they sing from the same hymn book when they talk decolonization. I've said to them I would like to have a chance to sit down and we have a debate so that I can understand better what is meant by decolonization. It seems obvious at one level, but at another level, it's not very clear, at least to me. It's an ideological debate as well, by the way. It's an ideological debate because from different ideological perspectives, it has different shades of meaning. But it's an important issue. It's been placed on the table and then it must be engaged and be debated. And not do like some of our students, not all of them do. You have to accept decolonization. It's a demand. Say, yes, I accept decolonization, but I say I can't do that as a minister. You have to engage me. You have to persuade me. You have to tell me what does that mean. We could have a very constructive debate actually as a country around that.
And then just in the context of institutional autonomy, Minister, can you tell us the proposed fee regulation, whether or not that will impede institutional autonomy?
No, Judge, it won't impact because we have had an agreement with the universities. It's not something that we have imposed as government. We said because this matter of fees, by the way, it has always been sensitive. That it has reached this level, it doesn't mean that it starts now. I mentioned one area where there are problems with fees earlier. Differential increases by various universities. There's one problem area. But the other problem area that we have had as government is that we increase NSFAS by 6%, but on average the fees rise by 8%, which means we are chasing a moving target that we will never reach. That was part of our own frustration as government because it means now we'll always be on a deficit. You increase NSFAS, but we take fewer students, but we assist fewer students. That has been another area. But also, the vice-chancellors themselves, fortunately, realized that this is a very politically sensitive issue. And then said, no, let's agree that we must have a framework. Now, that is why I gave that to the CHE. That framework, ideally, we are not looking at a government framework. We are looking at a framework and a methodology to arrive at a framework that would be accepted by everyone in the sector. That's why we've asked the CHE. Then the CHE is going to come back with the proposals to say, this is how we propose that we regulate the fees. The fact that I announced last year that not more than 6%, which then became Nzimande resolution when all of us had agreed together with the student leadership. There was a 6% increase, by the way, this year, except that it was all absorbed by government. So, 2017, when I made that announcement, I made it clear, Judge, that it's a recommendation coming out of the exercise that was done by the CHE. Although the CHE had recommended a particular figure, but I decided then through consultations, by the way. But it's for university councils to then make a decision, because legally, fees at universities are determined by university councils. So the university, theoretically, it's possible that one university may say, no, we don't accept this recommendation by the minister. It would be within their powers. We are going to increase fees by 10%, for instance. Or maybe for another university to say, no, okay, I can increase by up to 8%, but in the discussions and my council, we're going to increase by less than 8%. So it's the universities that are going. I'm glad also you're asking this, because sometimes I'm accused of usurping the powers. Why are you announcing for the councils? When I clarify, I say no, but it's councils who are going to take decisions. Then other groupings, especially students, said, yeah, we are passing the buck now. Why don't we instruct the universities? By how much are they going to be increasing? I can't do that. So I haven't usurped. It's a consensus position that has been reached by the sector to say, let's have this framework. I'm looking forward actually to the proposals of the CHE. And the sooner we have them, we are closer to the deadline that I gave them, the better. And I'm sure that also, by the way, the sooner we get these, the Commission will have to have a look at.
Thank you, Minister. Just the final topic which I wanted to deal with is that we've heard from many students in set one of our hearings that the African National Congress had, in both Polokwane and Mangaung, took resolutions that they would roll out fee-free higher education and training for all. And that's the basis of the demand, that they must now fulfill their promises made. Do you have any comment on that, on the resolutions made in relation to higher education and training at both Polokwane and Mangaung?
Thank you. In fact, I want to, well, if perhaps I can speak a bit more authoritatively if it's about the ANC. Going back to the Freedom Charter, which, by the way, wasn't an ANC document only. It's a document that was adopted by a whole range of other organizations. The Freedom Charter does not talk about free higher education. I'm sure now by this time as the Commission you should have looked at it, because I'm sure there have been lots of debates and arguments. Because it's actually very clear. In fact, it's interesting. My own interpretation is that the Freedom Charter was much more cautious than later documents of the ANC about higher education, especially for a developing country like ours. Can we close 10, is it? The doors of learning and culture shall be open. If you just be patient with me a bit, Judge. Yeah, just go down a little bit. There is that paragraph. Yes, you can stop there. It says education shall be free, compulsory, universal, and equal for all children. Then it says higher education and technical training. Now, that's my mandate at the moment. Shall be opened to all by means of state allowances and scholarships awarded on the basis of merit. So there's no free there. It says accessible to all, but it's based on merit, and also it's through state allowances and scholarships. That's what NSFAS has done. Actually, NSFAS has met this. Then, if you go to Polokwane and Mangaung, I think there's one document that's circulating in social media, Judge.
Just sorry, Minister, before you proceed.
Yes.
On the next slide, it talks about adult
yes.
illiteracy.
Oh, okay. Adult illiteracy, yes.
I wanted to check if that must...
but that's not adult education.
That's adult literacy.
It's adult illiteracy. That's adult illiteracy. By state, it shall be done through state what? Mass state. That's what Karikude is. Now, that is run by basic education.
Yes.
Adult illiteracy shall be ended by a mass state education plan. That's what Karikude has done. And in fact, Karikude has done very well. We have gone very far now as a country towards eliminating illiteracy. But that's not adult education. It's illiteracy. R-A-E-O-O. Now, Mangaung and you see, there is a document that is circulating in social media which talks about for all. What it refers to, it only points out that for all in the body of that resolution is not looking at the title of the resolution which says free higher education for the poor. So all in that instance refers to all insofar as it means the poor. It's not everybody. So there is no resolution that talks about free higher education for all in the African National Congress. At least also I was part of both the Polokwane Conference and the Mangaung Conference. And in the Mangaung Conference I was in the Education Commission, which drafted, which discussed that resolution. I think that if people want to say that there must be free higher education for all, yeah, there you are. Implementing higher education says implementing free higher education for the poor in South Africa. So where all comes in refers to the poor. For free education to all undergraduate level students will be finalized for adoption before the end of 2013. For those who are poor. We must admit we were a bit optimistic because we already had or we were going to receive that report on free higher education, Judge. That's why that resolution was optimistic, that it must be adopted before the end of 2013, a plan to roll out free higher education for the poor.
But Minister, I think the difficulty comes in the articulation of the resolution, because the resolution is not confined to the poor. It just says the policy for free higher education to all undergraduate level students will be finalized for adoption before the end of 2013.
But what I'm saying, Judge, is that might have been drafting. Look at the title. It says implementing free higher education for the poor in South Africa. And those are sub-paragraphs of that topic. I don't think I'm playing with words. It's just drafting. Maybe English in that instance, you see, from the part of those who are drafting. But it's very clear that it's for the poor.
So your argument is, having a look at that paragraph, you've got to read it with the subtitle, which gives context to it, and therefore never ever meant free education for all.
Absolutely, Judge.
Thank you, Chairperson. I have no further questions. I'd just like to check with the rest of the evidence leading team if there are any other questions. We've got no further questions, Chair.
None.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your time and the labour that's gone into this and your very clear presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Judge and Commissioners and evidence leaders.
Chairperson, if I may just indicate that the Minister's written response, which we've been working through today, is far more comprehensive than what he's managed to present orally because of time constraints. And we're in the process of marking up all exhibits. So we would ask that the written document be marked as an exhibit and that the contents therefore form part of the record of the Commission.
Yes, by all means.
But we will put an index of exhibit numbers before you
That will be most
shortly.
helpful. Thank you. By all means, feel free to go as soon as you like. Thank you.
I thought we were waiting for
No, you're waiting for nobody.
What time is starting to work? Doesn't permission get to say?
I don't know. I'll ask it now. It's the Appropriations Committee.
Tomorrow's appropriation. Unless they've been trying to get hold